was contracted during overseas travel. The Maryland Department of Health has notified all 3 patients of their test results. They are currently cooperating and they're in good condition. They're in quarantine and a thorough investigation is underway to fully determine any of their potential recent interactions with the public in order to further mobilize all state resources in response to this threat to public health. I have issued a proclamation declaring a state of emergency in Maryland.
Now, as earlier said, more than 180 people are infected according to an AFP tally. On Thursday, Washington state officials announced a jump in cases from 39 to more than 70. 11 of the 12 deaths have been reported there, with the other in California. Tech firms in Seattle like Amazon, Facebook, and Google were telling employees to work remotely, as was Microsoft in nearby Redmond. Some schools in the state have also decided to close for a couple of weeks and hold classes online. A cruise ship with 21 people who have symptoms was being held off the coast of San Francisco, California. The state has the second highest number of cases and declared an emergency as well. Thousands of people are traveling aboard the Grand Princess, the same cruise ship on which California's first victim was thought to have contracted the virus. The Grand Princess belongs to Princess Cruises, the company that operated the coronavirus-stricken ship held off Japan last month, on which more than 700 people tested positive. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence said 1.5 million test kits are going out to hospitals as he tried to reassure Americans after a new death from the coronavirus was confirmed, bringing the U.S. death toll to 12. During a briefing at the White House, Vice President Pence also said that intensified traveler screenings have been implemented in all airports in South Korea and Italy.
And we were pleased to learn that just shortly ago, the House of Representatives passed a federal funding bill by a virtually unanimous margin. It will now move to the Senate. We also established a travel advisory for Italy, portions of Italy and portions of South Korea over the weekend. But even as importantly, as of yesterday morning, we fully implemented a screening process. All direct flights from all airports in South Korea and Italy are now being subject to multiple screens before passengers board to come to the United States of America.
Good evening. Over the last 12 hours, we've been able to receive information both from South Korea and Italy, adding to our China information. And it's as we thought. The elderly and pre-existing conditions have a more serious illness when confronted with the coronavirus. Reassuringly, in South Korea, no one has died under 30. This is reassuring to us, and the median age in Italy was 81 of those who succumbed. Those who became ill, the median age was 60. So we find this data reassuring, but it also has really caused us to focus on the Americans who might be most vulnerable. So we're focusing resources, attention, and all of our capacity to ensure those who have pre-existing conditions and those who are elderly have access to the best prevention and treatment options.
It really is very important. It's very pragmatic about washing your hands 20 seconds of soap and water, or using the other disinfectants. Obviously training yourself to cover your sneeze or cough, either in your elbow or with a Kleenex that you will dispose of. I think these are very important things. Working hard not to touch your face. I think the most important thing for many of those individuals that might be a little type A, if you get sick, stay home. You're not helping your colleagues by going to work sick. And again, I think these are just very pragmatic. We've listed them. They're absolutely no different than what we ask the American public to do for flu. The one that's the most important is the role of masks. We need these N95 masks for the healthcare workers that are taking care of these patients. We do not recommend them to be used by the general public. And again, you all, if you tell the stories, are able to be great communicators of that, so that the American public gets accurate information. The overall risk to the American public at this time still remains low.
If you do get infected, if you're infected, as taking Seattle as the microcosm of that, it is exactly what Dr. Burke said. The risk of getting into difficulties is very heavily weighted towards people with underlying conditions and people with the elderly, where the young people, and there will be an exception here or there, the same way we see with influenza, but the risk for a young person who gets infected to getting into trouble is really low based on a lot of data that's coming out of foreign countries, particularly out of China.
There are some sites like Amazon where these prices have just skyrocketed. What's your advice to Americans who are trying to just buy the soap and water and the hand sanitizer that you're telling them to buy, but can't afford it at this point or can't find it?
I want to make it really clear that I don't think soap and water, vigorously washing your hands for 20 seconds is what the American public needs to do. If they want to use the hand sanitizers, that's another option. But I don't want people to think it's inferior to what we've recommended for decades, which is vigorous washing your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds.
Meanwhile, the city of Bethlehem was on lockdown on Friday after the first Palestinian cases of the deadly coronavirus were discovered there. The Palestinian government announced a month-long state of emergency late Thursday after the 7 cases were identified, while the Israeli Defense Ministry said it had imposed emergency measures on Bethlehem, with all people forbidden from entering or leaving the city. It added that the lockdown had been imposed in coordination with the Palestinian Authority. Authorities said the 30-day lockdown, the measures are essential to contain the disease. All but essential travel between Palestinian governorates was now prohibited, while all schools and educational facilities would also close. Public parks and tourist sites would close, while large sporting events, conferences, and other major gatherings are now canceled. Israel controls all entrances to the West Bank from the Jewish state, but the Palestinian government has limited autonomy in cities. The Palestinian Health Ministry said the cases had first been detected at a hotel in the Bethlehem area. South Africa on Thursday confirmed its first case of the novel coronavirus, a 38-year-old male who traveled to Italy, according to Health Ministry. It is the first case in Southern Africa and the latest confirmed case in Sub-Saharan Africa after Nigeria and Senegal.
And we confirmed the existence of a patient who has tested positive for the COVID-19 virus for the first time in the country, and this patient was identified in the province of KwaZulu-Natal.
The patient and his wife were part of a group of 10 people who arrived back in South Africa from Italy on March 1. Meanwhile, Cameroon has confirmed its first case of the novel coronavirus, a French national who arrived in the capital Yaoundé in February, according to the government. The man, 58, has been placed in isolation in a hospital, the health ministry said in a statement. In Sub-Saharan Africa, Senegal has registered 4 cases, all foreign nationals, and South Africa and Nigeria have 1 case each since the outbreak emerged in December in China. The Philippine Department of Health formed 5 separate teams to do extensive contact tracing for coronavirus disease after it has confirmed 2 more positive cases, including a Filipino who has no travel history outside the country. Aside from the contact tracing for the 2 Filipinos with COVID-19, the DOH teams will also trace the persons who may have had contact with 3 foreign nationals, a 38-year-old Taiwanese man, a 60-year-old woman from Sydney, and a 44-year-old Japanese national who recently traveled extensively in the Philippines prior to their positive test for COVID-19 upon returning to their home countries. Take a look.
Previous visitors to the prayer hall who are presenting with fever and or respiratory symptoms are encouraged to call the DOH hotline 02-8651-7800, local 1149 to 1150 for proper referral to the appropriate health facility. How the fifth case got the COVID-19, we really don't know, and that is the reason why we're doing contact tracing, is to be able to find out the source.
So that's why the Secretary was asking for his contacts who've been there, if they're to contact the numbers, the hotline numbers that we asked, because we want to establish whether there are other people who are having clinical signs and who are possibly infected. The mere presence of one confirmed case does not mean that we need to close down the prayer halls.
It can be considered as a local case. There is no transmission to speak of as of yet, because we only have one. Then, that's why we're doing contact tracing. It's premature to say that there is a local transmission. You know, once we get more positive confirmed cases, then that's the time that we can say there is a local transmission.
The 5 DOH teams will determine the individuals who may have had contact with 2 Filipinos who were recently found to be positive for the virus and the 3 foreign nationals who traveled in the country before testing positive for the virus upon returning to their home countries. The 2 Filipinos found to be positive for COVID-19 were a 44-year-old man who traveled recently in Japan and a 62-year-old man who has no travel history outside the country. They're considered the 4th and 5th COVID-19 cases in the country. The 5th case, a Filipino who has no travel history outside the country, had also frequented a prayer hall for Muslims in Green Hills, San Juan City. Aside from them, the DOH will now trace the contacts of the 3 foreigners who visited the country recently and tested positive for COVID-19 upon their return to their home countries.
Meron na pong binuong 5 teams ang Department of Health para matugunan itong pagtitrace natin ng mga nakasalamuhan ng mga taong to. So we have mobilized our epidemiologic and surveillance units in our Center for Health Development, Metro Manila, para i-lead itong mga teams na ito para magawa natin yung contact tracing for all of these identified individuals.
Pero ano kaya yung magiging siya?
Protocols will still be the same. No, we have standard guidelines and protocols pag gumagawa kami ng mga ganitong procedure. Pero syempre, iba't ibang sitwasyon. We have 3 foreign nationals apparently in their country already. Babalikan lang natin yung mga nakaraan nilang pinuntahan at mga nakasalamuha. Una po sa atin dati, no, ito ay 2 na pasyente o 2 positibo na nag-umpisa tayo mag-contact tracing. Dito ngayon, we're talking about 5 individuals. Merong iba't ibang period of stay dito sa Pilipinas yung foreign nationals. Tapos meron din mga iba't ibang pwestong pinuntahan. So we need to be as extensive as possible so that we can try to trace everybody, no, na nakasalamuhan itong mga tao.
We address the issue at different levels of interventions. The surveillance, we've done that since January 4. It's not as if we're just doing it now that we've seen the 2 local cases. But as a matter of fact, it will be good to stress that since January 4, we have already heightened alert level for our Bureau of Quarantine. We are encouraging the public to practice proper hand washing, social distancing, and cough etiquette. We call on the public to be vigilant and continue doing their part in containing the disease.
And the Vatican reported its first coronavirus case, saying it had suspended outpatient services at its health clinic after a patient tested positive for COVID-19. The clinic inside the tiny city-state, which has some 1,000 residents, will be deep cleaned, while the emergency room will remain open, according to spokesman Matteo Bruni. The patient tested positive on Thursday. The clinic is used by priests, residents, and employees, including those now retired as well as their relatives. Bruni said the Vatican was getting in touch with all those who had passed through the clinic as per protocol. And the Netherlands has recorded its first death in the novel coronavirus outbreak, according to health officials on Friday. An 86-year-old man with COVID-19 who was admitted to the Ikazia Hospital in Rotterdam has died, the National Institute for Public Health said, referring to the disease caused by the virus. This is the first patient in the Netherlands to die of the coronavirus, the RIVM said, adding that the source of the patient's contamination was still unknown. The number of novel coronavirus cases in the world is approaching 100,000, and more than 3,300 have proved fatal. The Netherlands now has 82 reported cases. An advisor to Iran's foreign minister who took part in the 1979 U.S. Embassy hostage crisis has died from the coronavirus, according to the official IRNA news agency. Hossein Sheikh-ul-Islam, a veteran and revolutionary diplomat, died late Thursday. Iran on Friday announced 17 more deaths from the novel coronavirus, raising the total number of people killed to 124 as the overall number of cases soared. 6 of those who died from coronavirus are politicians or government officials. Before his death, Sheikh-ul-Islam was advisor to Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. A former ambassador to Syria, he also served as deputy foreign minister from 1981 to 1997. Sheikh-ul-Islam was also one of the students involved in the 1979 Iran hostage crisis. Now that year, and less than 9 months after the toppling of the American-backed Shah, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. Now, this prompted Washington to sever diplomatic ties with Iran in 1980. The hostages were freed in January 1981 after 444 days in captivity. China may soon lift the quarantine imposed on the province at the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, which has been under lockdown for more than a month, according to a senior government official on Friday. Asked about the draconian measures taken in central Hubei province to contain the spread of the virus, Ding Shangyang, Deputy Secretary General of China State Council, told journalists the day everyone is waiting for will not be too far away. But Ding stressed that cases in Hubei and its capital Wuhan, where the virus emerged, still made up a huge proportion of the national toll. Some 56 million people in Hubei have been effectively quarantined since late January to stop the virus from spreading across the country when people return to work from their hometowns after the extended Lunar New Year break. But new cases in Hubei and Wuhan have been on a downward trend for several weeks. For the first time since China started publishing cases of new infections on Friday, there were no new cases reported in Hubei outside Wuhan, with 126. His remarks are the latest in a number of signs that life in China may soon begin returning to normal. And Professor Gabriel Leung, Dean of Medicine at the University of Hong Kong, said that the current coronavirus outbreak is more serious and deadlier than 2009 swine flu pandemic, and estimates that the fatality rate for symptomatic cases will be 1.4%. Take a look.
Through this robust model and estimation exercise, we estimate that the symptomatic case fatality risk of COVID-19 is 1.4%. Some of you may think this is not a very large number, but please remember this number has to be multiplied by the total number of people who get infected and are symptomatic. And even out of the officially reported numbers, we are close to 100,000 cases already. I am sure that the actual number is several times that, at least. While the rest of the world is still in the stuttering beginnings of a first wave, the eventual final epidemic size is going to be many times larger, most likely. And therefore, even a 1.4% symptomatic case fatality risk means a lot of lives. For people who are over the age of 70, it's about 3 times that average risk. So this is a very serious concern, especially amongst the older adult population. It is much more serious and deadlier than 2009 swine flu pandemic, let alone seasonal influenza, but it is not nearly as bad as 1918 pandemic.
Meanwhile, Seoul threatened to retaliate over what it called Tokyo's irrational plan to quarantine arrivals from South Korea over the coronavirus outbreak, turning the scientific issue into a diplomatic row. The two countries have close economic ties and are both major U.S. allies, democracies and market economies faced with a rising China and nuclear-armed North Korea. But their relationship continues to be heavily affected by Japan's colonial rule of the Korean Peninsula from 1910 to 1945, a dispute that escalated into a trade and security row last year. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Thursday announced that foreign arrivals who have recently been in China or South Korea would be required to spend 14 days in quarantine. The South's two biggest airlines, Korean Air and Asiana, on Friday announced the cancellations of most or all of their flights to Japan once the measures come into force. And K-pop band Super Junior indefinitely postponed their upcoming shows in the country. South Korea has reported more than 6,000 coronavirus cases, the highest total outside China, and around 60 countries and regions have imposed travel bans or quarantine on arrivals from the world's 12th largest economy. But it has taken particular issue with Japan's restrictions, with the presidential office calling the decision irrational and contrasting its scientific and transparent outbreak control campaign with Tokyo's opaque and passive efforts. Seoul summoned the ambassador to protest, with Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa telling him, quote, Japan's action this time was not only unfriendly, but also unscientific. Her ministry accused Tokyo of ulterior motives, saying in a statement, quote, we cannot help but question whether Japan has other motives than containing the outbreak. Eagle News will be right back. Stay tuned.
When visiting the Philippines, Manila or Quezon City is a popular destination. But oftentimes the hustle and bustle of the city can be more stressful on your vacation. So when you feel the need to reconnect to nature or relax again, there's a beautiful oasis just outside of the city called the Garden at Ciudad de Victoria. That you can see here include hydrangea, snapdragon, and stargazers. They're truly beautiful. The gardens at Ciudad de Victoria are so peaceful, tranquil, and beautiful that it's become a haven for young couples and a very popular venue for engagement photos. The next time you want an escape from the big city, the garden at Ciudad de Victoria is a wonderful place to visit.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB rating,
Welcome back. Rescue workers pulled people out from beneath the rubble after a residential building collapsed in Karachi, Pakistan, leaving some people dead. Take a look. Lebanese protesters closed streets in downtown Beirut and scuffled with security forces as they keep up pressure against the crisis-hit country's ruling elite and its deteriorating economic situation. Take a look. Lebanon has been gripped by mass protests against the political class and banking sector for months as it suffers its worst economic crisis in decades. Lebanon's Attorney General has just suspended an order freezing the assets of 20 banks and their directors over concerns about its impact on the country's fragile economy. The order was postponed to allow for the study of its impact on the national currency, banking transactions, as well as on the money of savers and economic security, according to Ghazan Kedat on Thursday, according to a statement carried by the National News Agency. Banks have imposed increasingly tight limits on dollar withdrawals and transfers abroad as part of measures to tackle a severe liquidity crisis. But bankers stand accused of having sent millions of dollars abroad despite those limitations. 3 deaf survivors of clerical sexual abuse from Argentina said they want Pope Francis to live up to his promises of reform, taking their call directly to the Vatican this week. The church has been accused of covering up this abuse for decades by moving abusing priests between different parishes and countries. judges at the Hague-based International Criminal Court last year rejected a demand by its chief prosecutor to open a full-blown probe into crimes committed in the war-torn nation, an investigation also bitterly opposed by Washington.
The Peace Chamber notes that in the prosecutor request, she provided information relating to alleged war crimes amounting to serious violations of Article 3 common to the Geneva Conventions, of torture and cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity, and rape and other forms of sexual violence committed as part of a policy by members of the CIA. That in support of her request for authorization of investigation into the situation in Afghanistan, the prosecutor presented information relating to numerous incidents which, in her view, established a reasonable basis that crime under the jurisdiction of the court have been committed.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo attacked as reckless a ruling by international war crimes judges that a probe into wartime abuses in Afghanistan, including possible atrocities by American forces, must go ahead. Pre-trial judges at the ICC had last year rejected a demand by its chief prosecutor to open a full-blown probe into alleged war crimes committed in the war-torn nation. Prosecutors at The Hague appealed the move, saying the judges had erred by saying the request was not in the interest of justice, and the appeals judges agreed with the prosecution. Meanwhile, the U.S. government bitterly opposed the probe. Take a look.
The United States is not a party to the ICC. We will take all necessary measures to protect our citizens from this renegade, unlawful, so-called court. This is yet another reminder of what happens when multilateral bodies lack oversight and responsible leadership and become, instead, a vehicle for political vendettas. And we have evidence suggesting that there have been efforts to provide misinformation to the court by foreign parties. We're going to take all the appropriate actions to ensure that American citizens are not hauled before this political body to settle a political vendetta.
With the two guys that we got up front.
In other news, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, once a front-runner in the race for the Democratic presidential nomination, ended her campaign setting up a two-man duel between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders.
You know, I was told at the beginning of this whole undertaking that there are two lanes, a progressive lane that Bernie Sanders is the incumbent for, and a moderate lane that Joe Biden is the incumbent for. And there's no room for anyone else in this. I thought that wasn't right, but evidently I was wrong.
Warren's withdrawal from the race for the top spot on the Democratic ticket against President Donald Trump in November comes after she failed to win a single state on Super Tuesday, including her own. Her decision to drop out comes one day after that of billionaire former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who quit on Wednesday after a disappointing Super Tuesday performance and endorsed Biden. President Trump responded to Warren's withdrawal with a tweet mocking her and Bloomberg. Take a look. Pocahontas Warren, who was going nowhere except into many Mike's head, just dropped out of the Democrat primary 3 days too late. Trump said she caused crazy Bernie, at least Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Texas, the president said, of 3 of the states at stake on Super Tuesday. Probably cost him the nomination, came in third in Massachusetts. Ministers from the OPEC cartel of oil-producing countries said they would recommend a production cut of 1.5 million barrels per day to their allies in the wider OPEC Plus grouping as they seek to counter the slump in demand caused by the COVID-19 outbreak. At an extraordinary meeting at the headquarters of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries in Vienna, Ministers agreed to recommend to the 8th OPEC and non-OPEC ministerial meeting a further adjustment of 1.5 million barrels per day until 30 of June 2020, a statement issued by the bloc said. OPEC ministers will reconvene on Friday and will be joined by their OPEC Plus colleagues. Countries in the OPEC Plus grouping of the cartel's allies would be asked to take on 500,000 barrels of the cuts, according to the statement. However, it remains to be seen whether the OPEC Plus states, Russia in particular, will be prepared to countenance such a large cut.
We decided to recommend to the OPEC and non-OPEC meeting tomorrow 1.5 million barrel new cut for the second quarter of 2020, and subject to the exception of the non-OPEC member countries for cutting 500,000 barrels per day.
See tomorrow. Are you confident? Tomorrow also. Was it?
Children will not participate in the Olympic torch handover and arrival ceremonies in a bid to prevent the spread of the new coronavirus, according to Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee Chief Yoshire Mori on Friday. Take a look.
今月19日、アテネで実施されます次式につきましては、140名の子どもたちによるパフォーマンスを予定がされておりましたけれども、子どもたちの安全を最優先に考え、また政府の、小中学校、高等学校等への要望もあります。そうしたことを踏まえまして、子どもたちの派遣を取りやめるということにいたしました。この皆さんの一番大事な歓声の披露をすることがをしてあげられなくなったということは、我々にとってもやっぱり大変断腸の思いであります。
A performance by 140 children was scheduled at the handover ceremony in Athens on the 19th of March, but will put utmost priority on the safety of children and cancel their trip. Mori told reporters the Olympic flame is set to arrive in Japan on March 20, but about 200 children will also have to miss the welcoming ceremony in Miyagi Prefecture. The torch will then embark on a nationwide relay starting in Fukushima, a disaster zone just 9 years ago after an earthquake-triggered tsunami swamped a nuclear plant and sent its reactors into meltdown. Organizers have been scrambling to give assurances that the Olympics from July 24 to August 9 remain on track despite the international outbreak of COVID-19 disease. And that's the news for tonight. Join us online and here again tomorrow evening. From all of us here at Eagle News, thank you and we'll see you soon. I'm Alma Angeles, always one with 25. Good night.